this part is very exciting because I don't have to be part of the live recording, but there is about to be a live recording of My Perfect Console. So we're going to have Simon Parkin here, who's a British author and journalist, has written for The New Yorker, is a fellow of the Royal Historical Society, an Orwell Prize finalist, and much else, and has run this amazing podcast, My Perfect Console, which I highly recommend after this session. And we're going to have a live interview with Alex Seropian, who is a University of Chicago alum who's here in mathematics prior to computer science being the big thing that it is today. And Alex is a co-founder and former president of Bungie, where Halo was made, in addition to Wide Load Games, Industrial Toys, and a number of other companies. So we're going to get some great perspective on the history and the present of video games. So in just a moment, we'll start recording, but please join me in welcoming Simon and Alex to stage.
Hello everyone. It's lovely to see you all. Really good to be here in Chicago. So I'm going to read out an introduction and bring out my guest. When he comes on, give us a big cheer. This is being recorded. It's going to go out as a live episode. So pretend that you're, at a stadium, not an academic conference. Okay, my guest today is a pioneering American video game developer whose work helped shape some of the most iconic series in the medium. After studying mathematics here at the University of Chicago, he co-founded Bungie in 1991, first developing Operation Desert Storm, then titles such as Pathways into Darkness, Marathon, and Myth. In 2001, he and his team released Halo Combat Evolved, a landmark first-person shooter that not only revolutionized console gaming, but also established Microsoft's Xbox as a viable force in the industry. In 2004, he left Bungie and founded Wide Load Games, eventually becoming head of Disney Interactive Studios. Since then, my guest has continued to establish innovative studios, most recently Look North World. His depth of experience from the early days of Macintosh design through to modern cross-platform worlds has given him a unique perspective on the craft, the business, and the evolution of interactive storytelling. Welcome, Alex Seropian. Brilliant. Alex, so nice to see you. So we're here at the university where you studied, and of course, close to the place where you founded Bungie. So I thought it might be an opportune moment for you to give some feedback to your educators. How was your time here, circa 1991? Any grievances?
Well, the food was, the kids today, they've got it pretty good. I mean, my son's here. I don't know if he's here, but he's studying here. And his dorm last year really looked like a Hyatt hotel. Very nice. I was in, not that, Woodward Court, which I guess was appropriately torn down to make room for the business school, of all things. No real complaints at all. Okay. I have fond memories of Turkey Tetrazzini, I guess, and Harold's Chicken. Do kids still get Harold's Chicken these days? Yeah.
What's Harold's Chicken for everyone?
Harold's Chicken is fried chicken. They serve it on 2 slices of white bread. So it kind of soaks up all the oil, grease. You know?
Very nice.
And they serve it in a white paper bag. I don't know if they still do that.
Okay.
But it's not food that you sort of like seek out unless you've been impaired or amplified. If you know what I mean.
I see. Okay, should we do another 20 minutes on fried chicken? We better talk about games. Sure. So let's start with a scene. I want you to take us to 1999. It's the Macworld conference. Steve Jobs is about to go on stage to reveal to the world the game that is called Halo. Where are you?
Actually, funny story. That whole thing leading up to that didn't necessarily go quite as planned. we had a few groups kind of going out to, I think it was at a Macworld. I always get this mixed up because I always think of Macworld as being in San Francisco, but I think this one was on the East Coast. And Joe Staten and Jason Jones went out to get everything set up, and they had the game on a disc. Back then, you didn't send like big things over the internet because you couldn't, so it was on like a CD. And they were getting into the car to go to the airport, and one of them dropped it, and it got run over and broke. They ended up out there empty-handed, and I was the one who had to figure out how to get, because we didn't have another disc. And back then you had to burn stuff on a disc, which, I mean, it took time, and like you couldn't send it digitally, so we had to get it to the airport to get flown out.
So you flew it?
Yeah, I had to make sure that it got actually delivered. So
That's so stressful. So wait, hang on. So they're at the airport. It falls on the ground.
car runs it over.
Like it would be far-fetched in the Netflix adaptation of this.
Yeah, exactly.
But it actually happened.
That actually happened.
It's not. Are there mobile phones? How did you hear this has happened?
I did have a mobile phone, but not a smartphone. You know,
Right.
like one of those old crazy flip phones.
And so what do you? So you then
And
have
actually,
to,
the guys who actually did the production work to put it on the disc, one of them is this guy Marty O'Donnell, who was an audio guy, and he had sent me recently the voicemail message that I left him on that day.
No way.
Which is really funny.
Yeah. So you have to. You're here, like 5 blocks away, and you have to burn a new disc.
Downtown Chicago.
Okay.
And I'm. I think Marty may have put the voicemail message online somewhere. It's really funny to listen to because I'm not freaking out, and I should totally be freaking out, but I'm basically like, hey, so the guys kind of had a problem and broke the disc. It is like 9 o'clock at night.
Right.
You know, it's like you got to go back to the studio, burn it. Now I'm going to take it over to the airport and stick it on a FedEx flight.
Right. Okay. So you didn't actually take the flight with the disc, or did you? You just handed it to someone.
I don't know, Marty might have taken it to the airport. That's a good question. How many years ago was this?
This
is the last century.
26 years ago. But it's important because this is the first time the world's going to see Halo. So
yes.
How do you watch the presentation?
How did I watch it?
Yeah.
I think it was streamed. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Which is weird that it could be streamed, but we couldn't send the file digitally. I don't know. It was a weird time, 1999. The internet was in kind of all sorts of weird little states.
Yeah, right.
Yeah.
And had you met Steve Jobs at this point, personally?
Yes. I did get the chance to meet Steve Jobs a couple of times. He was curious about video games, but it clearly wasn't the core business for Apple. But I was summoned to Cupertino at one point, along with some other folks, including John Carmack and others who were game makers, to give some input on the next round of computers that were coming out.
Right. And you mentioned your colleague, Jason Jones, and he had someone had convinced Steve Jobs to see Halo, and then Steve plays the game and is like, okay, I'm going to put it on stage. Is that kind of how it went down?
Yep. Peter Tampty, who ran our publishing business, used to work for Steve and used to run consumer marketing for Apple. So when we were putting together that demo, I was able to get it in front of Steve Jobs, who saw it as, I think from his perspective, he saw it as art, you know, and wanted it to be associated with the Mac. And in fact, years later, I came back to show the Mac version of Halo again because we had been acquired by Microsoft at that point. There is a famous phone call that was made at the end after that acquisition where Steve Jobs called Steve Ballmer to express his opinion.
Right.
Which I think involved a lot of yelling.
Yeah, I bet. Yeah. Well, we'll come to that in a bit. But at the time when Jason shows Halo to Steve Jobs, it's not called Halo. It's gone through a round of terrible, terrible names. I'll read some of them out.
They're not terrible. They're fantastic.
Okay, well, we'll let the audience decide. So, Monkey Nuts, Blam. Would we have seen Blam 2? Blam ODST? I don't think so. Hard Vacuum, and my favorite, the Santa Machine. And I guess someone said, look, we've got to figure out the name before we show this to the world. So, yeah, what happened?
Actually, the name was a long time in the making. We went through many different ideas for names. And Halo almost wasn't named Halo. There was a lot of debate in the studio about whether that was a good name, like it had some connotations that some folks on the team weren't super crazy about, but it's also one of the few, it had meaning in the game. It's a short word, it sounds good, something that we felt like we could own. Ultimately, Jason and the team decided that was the right way to go, and it's a brilliant name. When we got to Microsoft, of course, the publishing machine decided to do some focus testing around the name, and decided that it wasn't a good name.
Right.
Almost changed again, but we did negotiate just the Combat Evolved
right.
subtitle.
Gamers. Got to have combat in there. And, there are about, I believe, 15 people at Bungie at the time that you're making this, or around the time Halo is shown. So was this a big deal? What were the stakes?
Well, let's see. Sort of the growth of the company, it did start at, I was a solo developer for a little while. Then Jason and I were working together. We had folks some of them from the university that were helping us out. And it wasn't until we hit our third game that we moved into a proper office and started, building a team. And this was that game was Pathways into Darkness, which was in, 95 probably. So the game industry was very different then. You could make a game with a small team. Then we did a series of games called Marathon and Myth, and by the time we got to working on Halo, the Halo team was fairly small, but it was one of 3 teams at the studio. I think we probably were around 65 or so at that point. So the stakes, I'll tell you what the stakes were for us as a private company in Chicago. The last game that we released before Halo was a game called Myth 2, which is a sequel to a strategy game that we made. That game had a crisis moment for us as a business where it had a really bad bug in it. And this is a bug that we didn't know about until the game was already pressed on discs, already in boxes, already on the way to stores. And back then, you didn't buy games online, you bought them in a store. So a company like us, to get the game on a store, had to pay a lot of money to Walmart, and that was not refundable.
I read you'd manufactured 800,000 copies of the game, is that right?
Sure, if you say so. It was a lot. I've probably blanked some of the numbers out of my head. But I get a call from a person who I'm still friends with today who's was doing our localization into Japanese for the Japanese version of the game. And he told me, he said, hey, I think there might be a problem because I just uninstalled the game and it deleted my hard drive. Yeah, that's a problem. And it turned out that, back then you would, on a PC game, you would include an uninstaller, because you would install it and, it's complicated. You don't just drag it to the trash or whatever. You run the uninstaller, and the engineer this is a good tip for you engineering students out there. The engineer decided to just rm-r, the directory in which the game was installed, the parent directory of the app, which if you installed it to your hard drive root, not good. So what was at stake? That was our last shipping experience right there. It cost the company a lot of money. Like here was the pivotal conversation that me and the leads at the company had was like, hey, so we got this bug. We just found out about it. And all the games are going out. It's a holiday. What do we do? Options are nothing. Option 2, we announce that this is a thing and promise that we'll make an update. And option 3 is we recall everything that's in the trucks, in the warehouse, etc., bring it back, repress the discs, repackage everything, and then ship it after Christmas, lose all of our advertising stuff we did in stores, but we know nobody's ever going to call us and go, I bought your game and it erased my hard drive. And we were young, and, we thought we were like, I don't know, doing the right thing, so we picked C.
Right.
Which it was the right thing.
It was the right.
But it was very expensive.
Yeah.
So what was at stake was really the future of the company. This game had to work.
Right.
It had to be successful. And by the time that we got to Macworld, showed the game off, and the development of that game was magical. Like, so many people delivered on what we hoped they could deliver. And everything came together. I think Jason called it like a assembly of a cathedral out of blind parts, whatever. But it really was the effort of, at that point, probably 85 people, maybe 100 people that really cared. But between there, we did that demo, got a lot of attention from folks. We ended up in a partnership with Take-Two. Microsoft came calling, and we got the opportunity to be the launch title on the Xbox, which we totally went after. And then at that point, the stakes changed again because, well, now we're like this big Fortune, 10 company is counting on us to help establish this brand new console, and if it doesn't work, then like nothing works. and we don't have, like, we'd never been in a position where you had to ship a game on time. We always wanted to ship a game on time, but there was no negotiating that date. It was just the date,
Yeah, right.
And we showed up it's the last bit here. It's like we showed up at E3 the summer before the game was coming out, and it was horrible. Everybody thought the game was a joke, It was like it ran at like 15 FPS. We had half a level done. And the game had to be done in like 4 or 5 months.
Okay. Well, we'll leave you there. We'll come back to this story. Don't panic, everyone.
Yeah.
I'm just interested. What happened to the guy that did the uninstall, instruction? Did you have to tell him? Did he cry?
No. There was no crying. Maybe there should have been. I don't know. My point of view was like, okay, stuff happens. You're never going to make this mistake again. I can guarantee that. I think he's gone on to do great things in the industry.
Great. Can you say who it
if
is?
he's still alive? No, he's still alive. No, I'm not going to say who it is.
You're not going to say? Okay. We can take it out after we leave here.
Sure you can, yeah.
Okay. All right, Alex, let's come to the premise of the keynote. I've asked you to pick the 5 video games you'd like to put on your ideal fictional games machine. You've picked 5 classics. Very excited to share the stories of these games. So we're going back to June 1984 for your first game, which was developed in the Soviet Union. What's your game and why do you love it?
Yes, all right, well, with that intro, you all know what it is, right? Yes, Tetris.
All right, let's have a little look. Hang on. Tell us, when did you first encounter Tetris?
Before I do that, let me just tell you all that I'm really good at Tetris. Says everybody who's ever played Tetris. But when Tetris 99 came out, I guess for the Wii, which was like the Battle Royale Tetris, I was like, all right, this is my jam. And I'd never won. I've come in second a few times. But yeah, so Tetris, I think I probably played Tetris for the first time when I was here. And it was the ultimate, procrastination. I'm not going to do, my work. I'm going to play Tetris. And you would find yourself an hour later still. And it's it is the ultimate. It's not ultimate. It's one of the first, I guess you would say console arcade games are all roguelike. But this was it, And for me, it just has such purity of design. It's so simple. And it stimulates so much of the brain to play. It starts very logical and easy, and it gets, the end game is exceptionally intense, and you can get flow in this game. And when you get flow at the end game, it's, I don't know, it's just such a rush. I love this game. I think it's one of the perfect games. I did have the opportunity to work down the hall from Alexei Pajitov at Microsoft when he was there. We overlapped a little bit.
Did you interact with him?
I went to go pay homage and say hello, and I have run into him a few times. The most humble cat you'll ever meet. But yeah.
Yeah. So
Tetris.
So when you were here, what system were you playing Tetris on?
Probably on my Mac SE, black and white unibody Mac machine. That's what I had when I was here.
Very nice. Did that have competitive mode on it, 2-player, or did that come later?
The one I had, I think, so my girlfriend, who's now my wife, also very good at Tetris, and also very competitive. So I don't think it had competitive mode in the software, but it had competitive mode.
Very good. All right, Alex, let's come to your story. Did you grow up in Chicago or somewhere else?
I did not. I grew up on the East Coast in a suburb of New York. I didn't know all that much about the University of Chicago, except it's where my brother came to college. My older brother, who's 9 years older than me, and I came and visited him, and there is something about the vibe here that's just unique and different. So no, I did not grow up here. Mm-hmm.
So when you say the suburb of New York, how far out from Manhattan were you?
40 minutes on the Metro train.
Okay. And what were you like as a kid?
I was, a little chubby, I guess. I was totally into sports, though. I played varsity soccer and tennis. Grew up playing tennis. I'm super tennis nerd still to this day. Any tennis nerds out there? Yeah. You know what other game I'm really good at is Virtua Tennis. I got a good Virtua Tennis story if you want to hear that one. But in any case, I was into sports. I was into computers. My brothers gave me the nickname Gizmo, and they still to this day call me Giz, because I knew how to program the VCR. I knew I was the one in the house when we got our first computer.
Reference.
What?
Not a Gremlins reference.
Not a Gremlins reference, but that would be welcome too. I had a series of Walkman cassette players. I was so into that. That was the crazy technology back then. First Walkman is whatever, and then they had the Walkman that was 5 millimeters bigger than a cassette tape all the way around, because it was so micronized or whatever. Then the waterproof one that was yellow. Did anybody remember Walkman? Those things? Yeah. That was I don't know. That's what I would spend my whatever money I had. I guess I would collect money when did you do this? Your parents would give you money to go get something at the store, and then you just put the change.
Oh, sure,
yeah. So I would save all that up and buy a Walkman.
Right. And what was your first cassette?
Mixtape. I don't think I ever bought I went from vinyl to CD, and then I was making mixtapes.
Okay, what was on it?
Okay, so let's see. Back then,
you're not dodging it.
No. So I've gone through. Let's see. On it would have definitely been some Led Zeppelin, some Beatles. At that point, maybe not Beastie Boys yet, but at some point, yes, definitely would have been. Cure, Simple Minds, all that stuff.
Nice, very good. And I read you're of Armenian descent. Is that right?
That is correct. Yes.
So tell me about that. Tell me about your parents and what's their situation at this time.
So my mother's and my father's families both fled their homelands. My mother's father, my mother's family grew up in Germany, and in World War II left Germany to go to the UK. So she grew up in Wales. And then my father's family, my grandfather and that generation, fled a suburb of Istanbul, Turkey, in the 1915, during the genocide and the World War I era, fled to France and then ended up in New York. And my parents only met because my dad's best friend was my mother's cousin, and my mother volunteered, she was a nurse in St. Thomas's Hospital, volunteered to escort some American patient back to New York. And when she got to New York, called her cousin, and her cousin set her up on a blind date with my dad. Wow. And she never went back. Huh. So, in a good way. I mean, they fell in love and got married.
She's still in the cellar.
Yeah, so I don't know, growing up, I had sort of kind of this romantic notion of meeting your soulmate and that kind of stuff.
Right, of course, because so many strange little twists of fate that lead to that meeting, right? So you can't help but be a bit romantic about it, I suppose.
Yeah.
And what were they doing? Was your mum still a nurse when you were a kid? What was your dad up to?
Yeah, so growing up, my father had a medical practice. He was a doctor, and my mother ran the practice and was also the nurse in the medical practice. So they worked together. And I remember my mother telling a story about how one day they got home after work, whatever. One night a week, they would always stop at Dick's Cabin, that restaurant in Dobbs Ferry. Mm-hmm. And she gets home and the phone rings, and she picks up the phone, and this woman's like, "Is this Mrs. Seropian?" And she's like, "Yes." And she's like, "I just want you to know, I saw your husband out at a restaurant with some woman canoodling around." And it was her, She didn't. She's like, "Oh, thank you for letting me know."
Amazing. And so you mentioned being into Walkmans. What about video games? Did you have computers or a console?
Yes, so my first sort of digital sort of gaming experience was an Atari 2600. My dad brought home an Atari 2600. Actually, he brought home the Sears Telegame. So I think in the 2 o'clock there was a Sears Pong game, but Sears also did a deal with Atari where they did their own branded Telegames version of the 2600. So that's what we had. I actually just saw it in my basement yesterday. I still have 30 carts for it.
Right.
And that was my first, I played a lot of Atari. And I had a couple friends who played, and it was kind of my first formative social memories of going through a story with, we weren't playing, it wasn't co-op, but I think we were playing, remember the Indiana Jones game? There were some puzzles in there. And before the internet, you played an adventure game and you hit a puzzle and you didn't know how to solve it.
Right.
You pretty much took a break. You're like, okay, I guess and then you'd think of something later, or your friend at school will tell you what they did, and then you go, you can go back, and now you start making progress again. Mm-hmm. So that was my sort of formative video game experience with 2600. And then my dad got a personal computer with the DEC Rainbow, runs CPM, no games, except for Zork, which was,
nice.
Zork probably should have made this list, I don't know, but very influential game for me. I still haven't, has anybody played Zork? All right, good. Maybe a dozen of you. How many of you have finished and beaten Zork? 1, okay, 2, okay. I still have not beaten it. I had a break 2 years ago. I had sort of like a break where I took a little bit of time off. I started playing Zork again, and I started a Miro board where I started mapping everything, and I was like, I'm finally gonna beat it. And then I don't know, something happened, and I still haven't beaten it yet. Right. It's on my bucket list, not my game bucket list, my actual life bucket list to beat Zork. Will happen at some point. And then we got a Mac in 1984.
Okay, all right, which seems meaningful.
Very pivotal.
Right, okay. And
that's when I started teaching myself how to program.
Oh, you did? Okay, yeah, tell us about that.
With the Mac, at some point, Apple published these books. I think they were called Inside Macintosh. It was a volume of books that described how the user interface libraries work, and all the Pascal. It was the language you wrote in was Pascal. Which oddly is still foundational in modern computing. Things haven't changed much. But anyways, they had these books you could get, and then you could learn how to program the user interface, and I found it fascinating. Started teaching myself how to code, just so I could make the computer do stuff.
Yeah, and what kind of things you made? What's your first game that you made? Is it one that you copy in, or did you try inventing your own thing?
Oh goodness, what was the first? I do remember having a game with a stick figure that you could kind of run around on a plane. I also remember playing games like Beyond Dark Castle, which it's nobody. If you haven't played that, you should check it out. It's like kind of an adventure platformer, almost like sort of Castlevania-ish, but it was on the Mac, had a ton of personality on it.
Yeah. I think Lucas Pope picked that game when he was on the show.
Oh, right on.
Yeah. Sorry.
Awesome. It was a great game.
Yeah.
But yeah, just little things like that. And at one point, me and my brother and a friend of ours, we thought we could make a football game for the Mac. And that was kind of when the name Bungie first entered the lexicon for me.
Really?
Of like, we'll just call this thing Bungie.
Why?
Because it's a fun sounding word. It also had some other stories, or I don't know.
Okay.
It's still a myth.
Right.
Yeah. Why the name Bungie?
Okay.
Yeah.
All right. You don't want to clear it up then?
Not really.
Okay.
Yeah. It's not my place anymore.
Okay, and so your elder brother comes here to the university, and I guess he's the first member of your family to go to uni because of the displacement. So that shows you a potential future. And are you already thinking, I want to code video games?
I'm thinking I want to start a business. That was the other thing. I was doing dumb stuff, like I would go door to door selling popsicles.
Okay.
You know, which on a really hot summer day in New York is like, okay, your stock will last like 2 stops before now I'm selling lemonade. Yeah. In fact, my first year here, I started selling my chemistry notes until the chemistry department shut me down.
Right.
They didn't like me advertising about the professor's accent.
And
To be fair, he had an accent.
right. And you studied mathematics, which
Yes.
seems, from what you're talking about there, why?
Good question. And I don't mean that in a facetious way. I never thought I would pursue math as a degree or a field, but I discovered, when you go to college, you learn things about yourself, and I very much remember realizing that I enjoyed my math classes, and I felt like I was reasonably good at it. And it was one of the first times I kind of gave myself permission to do a thing that maybe was outside of what I thought other people would expect from me. Mm-hmm. And I think that's why. I was like, I like this. It's not necessarily the expected thing. Mm-hmm. And that's why.
So you enjoyed it when you got here and you...
I think a lot of things I've done in life has been because it's not what's expected.
Really?
Yeah,
Maverick.
to mixed results.
All right, well, why don't we come to your second game, because we're getting to this part of the story now. So this is a Macintosh game from 1992. Tell us, what's the name?
Oh, the name is Minotaur. Oh my gosh.
So I got this clip from YouTube, and I wasn't sure if that was the actual music, because I couldn't find the soundtrack anywhere.
No, that was not the actual music, though.
Okay.
That does sound like maybe something out of the Marathon soundtrack, or maybe inspired by the Marathon soundtrack.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right. Well, tell us about the game. Yeah.
Okay. Well, so I was really on the fence, and we had a little back and forth about this game. I didn't want to be too narcissistic because it's a game that we did publish at Bungie. I'll caveat, I didn't write a single line of code for this game. This was Jason's game. And this is the game that he was working on when I first met him. And it's, I really love this game. It's just pure multiplayer. It's like dungeon crawl. It's you run around, you discover items and pick them up. You start off with nothing, sort of battle royale-ish. You pick up stuff. Everything's got an interesting effect in the game. Either it's like does damage, it protects you from damage, has some effect on the other player like a spell, or has some effect on game state like it can teleport or it can glue somebody to the floor, that kind of stuff. So what ends up happening is you run around, collect stuff, and then you think. And you think, oh, here's what I got. I'm going to create myself a recipe to go kill the other player. And there's 8 of you running around in here, all doing that simultaneously, and you get a lot of emergent play because, you figure out, oh, I can teleport the enemy to where I'm standing, glue him to the floor, run 5 spaces away, take my crossbow out, and pelt him from distance, and he can't hit me. That's an awesome strategy. Until the second you teleport him, they cast the Enigma spell, which makes you run in a random direction wherever you run, so you can't get away, and they just beat you to death with an axe. So this is why I love this game, is because it's simple, it's very much multiplayer, it's a ton of fun, and it makes you feel smart when it works. It was a little ahead of its time because you had to play with there was no computer opponent, and it was sort of before the internet, 92. So you had to be on a LAN or connect via a modem.
So yeah, how easy was it for you then to get a team together to play? Do you have lots of willing friends?
Well, yeah, I mean, when you're in college, sure, no sweat.
Yeah, okay. So yeah, tell us about, you mentioned Jason there, who is really so instrumental in everything that happens from this moment on. So tell me, when did you first meet him here at the university?
Yeah, so we were in a class together. It was an AI class, actually, taught by Chris Hammond, who I think was here, sandwiched here between his stints at Northwestern. And here's how I met Jason. I'm sitting in a lecture, and the teacher is talking about this assignment, and that we'd have to go to the Mac lab to do it. You all probably don't have a Mac lab anymore because you probably all have Macs. But none of us really had computers. So you got to go to the Mac lab. Oh, and you got to get on a Mac 2 FX that's got 8 megs of RAM. Back then in the day, 8 megs of RAM was a lot. That was a machine that was probably $5,000-$6,000, to have a machine that beefy. And this kid raises his hand and says, oh, I can do that on my computer. I got 8 megs of RAM. And that was Jason. Mm-hmm. And I'm like, who the hell is this guy?
That's funny you say that. I read an interview with him where he said that he thought you thought he was a dick for having such a good computer.
True. But I did meet him. In fact, we had a friend in common, Pete Hallenberg, who I think used to run one of the companies that was on that slide at the 2 o'clock. And he introduced us, and that's where I saw Minotaur, which was in an early state, and Jason was like, yeah, I've been working on this since high school or whatever. And I'm like, dude, this is awesome. We should ship it. And he's like, no. And it took a while to convince him. But this was sort of like this. I had just shipped our first game, Operation Desert Storm, which was like a game that I wrote entirely by myself with my brother and that friend from high school, helped me with some art. And, I did the whole shrink wrap thing, discs that I sold enough to basically break even. So I'm trying to convince Jason that we can do, we've done this once, we'll do it again. It'll be even better. And it took a little convincing, but.
I mean, you must be 22, 23, very entrepreneurial. Where did that come from, those instincts?
For me, I think it's genetic. My grandfather, both grandfathers who basically uprooted their life and their family, fled the country in which they were oppressed, and set up brand new somewhere else, were both entrepreneurs. My grandfather on my mother's side it started and operated a factory in Wales and was very successful for a while. And then my grandfather on my dad's side, who immigrated eventually to New York, had a photo engraving business, which was an incredibly tedious, very detailed craft. If you don't know what it is, you basically look at these. They used to print stuff using these metal plates, and a photo engraver would sit on the plates and basically airbrush the image by hand by carving on these plates, and that was my grandfather. And so they both had businesses.
Right. Okay. So you're exposed to that from a young age.
I think I was exposed to that, and I think there's something built into that generation that I don't know if this generation still has, but for them, they were very untrusting of the world, and that I think that meant they had a very much the point of view that they had to make their own success. Nobody was looking out for them except for them. In some ways, it's very cynical, but it's also, I think it made them self-made. Right. And that, I think, rubbed off on me. You know, I've fallen for a couple of not really phishing scams, but like, I usually don't fall for that shit, you know what I mean? Somebody rings the doorbell, I'm like, move along.
Really?
And I think that comes from that generation.
Right, okay. Yeah, it's interesting. Like, I suppose for young people, youngish people, when the Second World War breaks out, suddenly all the rules get torn up, right? And like you say, you might have to flee your country, and that's such an enormous decision to have to make. Is the danger now so great that I'm going to abandon my home and try and make a life somewhere with nothing? I mean, that's quite heavy, isn't it? It does flow down a bit, the generations.
It is, and then I never internalized this as a kid, but you see that generation go through that, and you whether you realize it or not, the reality is that their success and their worth was their own, you know, and if you had to start over, you can. And in some ways, that's the ethos of an entrepreneur, you know? Like, I was talking to somebody once, Jordan Weissman, another guy from Chicago, who told me all entrepreneurs are idiots. Because you pretty much have to convince you have to stand on a cliff and say, yeah, let's jump. This is likely going to fail. Right, yeah. But I think that the fact that, you know, that generation did start over and it was okay.
Mm-hmm. I do wonder, you know, we've got students in the room, and there might be some parallels with COVID and the pandemic, because I think for people who are maybe students here now, perhaps they were 16, 17 when that all happened, and suddenly, you know, you're a kid and you just realize, oh, the world's not stable. Like, the things I rely on can fall apart and unravel in like weeks, actually. And so, yeah, I wonder if it's not the same thing, obviously, as a global war, but there is that little like sense of, oh, reality is not completely fixed, right?
Yeah, I mean, I think, you know, for my generation that grew up sort of in the 80s in the U.S., we've had one of the most comfortable, secure runs in history. And it wasn't until 9/11 that maybe some of our confidence in the stability and reality of the world was at all questioned. And I think you're right. This generation that's grown up with COVID as in the formative years possibly has a slightly different view, and maybe for the better, because it's not. I don't think it's good to get too comfortable.
Interesting. Right. I think we might have missed a small step that I want to ask you about, just because you mentioned getting that Sears console when you're tiny and those Atari games. Am I right in thinking you made a Pong clone and that was your first game you put out?
Yes. Yeah.
And it was called Gnop.
It was.
Which is Pong
Very
backwards.
clever, isn't it? Yeah.
I like it. Tell me about that. What made you do that? And where are you in the timeline when you're doing that?
I was probably here, and it was really just like, okay, if I actually want to make a game and ship something commercial, I should do something first. You know, like just try and actually finish something, and that was a quick, easy-ish project to go through a whole cycle of starting, making, and finishing.
Got it.
Which I think, you know, if anybody is working, like thinking about a career in games, it's part of the advice that I give to anybody is to make stuff and go through a process of understanding what it means to finish something, because, you know, those are the two hardest things: right. Starting something and finishing something, probably in reverse order. Finishing something harder.
Yeah, right. Absolutely. And did you give the game away free but sell the source code? Is that right? Yeah.
That's right.
So that's that's not a model that was around at that time. Where did that idea come from?
I may have seen that. Somebody may have done that.
Right, okay.
That might have been actually. I think it wasn't really a model, but I think there were a few people doing it, and I was
Okay,
like, yeah, okay, I'm not going to sell this game. It's Pong.
I see. Right. Okay.
But
Did
maybe
you do any twists on it, or was it just Pong?
Oh yeah, no, it had some sound effects.
Very good.
I've done a lot of sound design in my career. I love sound.
Mm-hmm.
I love audio.
Okay. Did you do anything on Halo?
I did do some voiceover.
What, the little grunts? What are they?
No.
Okay.
Inconsequential background stuff that has no names.
Okay. All right, cool. Okay, so the game that we just saw, Minotaur, that's Jason's game. Had you founded Bungie by this point? Have you graduated, or is it you're in your final year or something?
Yeah, so this must have been senior year, so I had started Bungie, and I had shipped Operation Desert Storm the spring of my senior year.
Right, cool.
Yeah.
So you developed a whole game, just founded a company and put it out all before you graduate?
Yes, right around, yeah. The exact chronology, I'd have to go back and look at some things, but basically, yes, I was...
How? How'd you manage all that?
I think, actually, you know what? My brother sent me my grade report from spring quarter of my senior year. That's how. Yeah, it wasn't super great.
Okay.
But I that's one of the things that I think I was gifted with was persistence. I'll beat my head against the wall until the wall breaks. Mm-hmm. Happily.
Yeah, we're getting that sense. And so, yeah, what effect does putting out Minotaur have? Is it a success? Is it your first big success?
Well, I mean, ultimately, in the long view, let's call it very, very successful. In the 6 months to a year in which that game was built and came out, it was basically did the same as the first one. We had another chance to make a game, release it, and it basically broke even. But it did start a very productive relationship with me and Jason and some of the other folks who were helping us out with Minotaur at the time. It did increase the relationships that the company had with, say, distribution. We got some more players who knew who we were, but still very small. And I very much had a existential moment of thinking whether this was still worth doing. I'd made and shipped 2 games at this point, and neither of them had made me as rich as the Excel spreadsheet that I'd created. Oh, really? So there's something wrong. Is my Excel sheet wrong? No. Right. Should I still be doing this? And we did give it another go.
Okay, and just paint a picture of where you're at here. So you've finished your final year. Do you get premises, or where are you living and where are you working? Where's the computer?
This is a British phrase. Do I have an apartment?
Sure.
Yeah.
What did I say?
Yeah, you said premises.
Oh, okay. Yeah.
Yeah. I figured it out. Context. Yes. So my girlfriend and I, now my wife, moved
You've
into.
met here.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I was the first person she met. No, second person she met. She met a roommate and then walked across the hall, knocked on the door, and I answered it. So I don't know, maybe some ways that kind of mirrors my parents' story.
Yeah, right. I was just thinking.
I really thought about that. Truthfully. But anyways, we moved into an apartment. She was working in a lab and paying the bills, basically. And I was doing this video game thing.
Right, okay.
No questions asked.
Very good. And were your parents supportive, or are they thinking, you've kind of run away with the circus type thing?
Parents have always been very supportive. I don't think they really knew what I was doing. And there's some distance. There wasn't really day to day. But there was no internet, so it's not. They weren't FaceTiming me, going, "What are you doing?" Or any of that. But I've told this story a few times. Coming out of college, being technical, and I interviewed for jobs, and I had a few job offers.
Oh, you did? Okay.
One of which was like a really great program in New York City with Morgan Stanley, which I had a conversation with my dad about what he thought. Give me advice, Dad. I kind of want to do this company thing. I got this game I'm working on, and I got this stuff. And he suggested that I get a job, and get some experience that I could then channel into a business. And I don't know if it was rebellion, reverse psychology, or whatever, but I did ignore that advice, and maybe it was just passion. I really wanted to do it, and so that was right when I started, and then from thereafter they were very, very supportive. They had copies of the game boxes up on the wall in their house at some point.
Oh, sweet.
Yeah.
Nice. All right, let's come to your third game for your perfect console. This came out in September 2001. It's an absolute classic PlayStation 2 game. What is it?
This is Ico, or Eco.
Let's play a bit of it. Yeah, so tell me, how did this come into your life?
Well, I was in Seattle when I played this game. We'd been working on Halo, and I was at Microsoft, and this is one of the few games that I've played with Laura, my wife, and this is like the first. I don't know. Has anybody played this game? Ico? Yeah. It was, I think, the first game I ever played that like made me feel something. Like I was emotionally invested in this game, and we both were. I mean, Laura wasn't really playing it; she was kind of watching me play, and we cared a lot about these characters and their journey and the end game. And it was one of those experiences. Like, I had been making games for a while, and this was like, these people are doing something different. There's something really special here, and it kind of broadened my view of what this craft of video games could be, and what I could deliver. So it was pretty influential for me.
Yeah, it's difficult to remember that time, but directed by Fumito Ueda, who goes on to make Shadow of the Colossus.
Shadow of the Colossus is similar, not as emotionally connective for me because of this has the two characters, but
right.
Another just incredible vibe.
Yeah, one of the buttons on the PlayStation is just to hold the girl's hand and release it by releasing the button. So it's such an unusual interaction at a video game in 2001, isn't it? Where normally it's to pull the trigger, right?
Let's be honest. Right, exactly. Yeah.
Okay, bro. Right, let's come back to the story. So tell me about how you get a bit of success with Minotaur, and then you start taking on a few other people, and you move into first-person shooters, and things start to happen, right? Tell me about that journey.
Well, let's see. I guess that journey started after Minotaur had come out. Jason and I realized that Minotaur was kind of niche. Like you had to have a modem. So you had the thought of, hey, let's make something that more people could play. And this was right when Wolfenstein was coming out. Right. And there was this tech demo that Jason showed me where he took the stone textures from Minotaur. If you remember that screen a minute ago, it had the stone top down. It was like this weird view, right? It was top down, but you're looking at the side of the wall. Taking those textures and doing 3D projection mapping in a orthogonal 3D environment, just running around like Wolfenstein. And that sort of started our journey into 3D games. And that first game was Pathways into Darkness, which was, I guess, technically a first-person shooter, but it played way more like an adventure game The pacing was, there was action and enemies that you eliminated, but there was dialogue, there were puzzles, things like that. And that's the game that kind of made me think that, okay, this could be a business. Now, this is 3 years in. This is our third game. I'm in my basement on Hyde Park Boulevard on a exercise bike. Because, it's probably winter. It's too cold to go outside. And I had a fax machine. Everybody see a fax machine? I had to send a fax like a couple months ago. You know how hard it is to send a fax now? Anyway, I had a fax machine, and it rang, and we had just signed up this new distributor. Somebody recommended it, whatever, and their first order came through, and it was like the biggest order I think it was probably like a $50,000 order.
Wow.
And up to
Good
that
moment.
point, like all of Minotaur probably made, like the entire run probably made $15,000 or something like that. So I'm on my exercise bike, ring, fax machine, bzzz, and it's like literally right there. I'm looking over. Oh, it's the new distributor. Cool. Okay. Well, what? I got off the bike, and I was like, and this was right when I was like, should I still be doing this anymore? So I don't know. Every company that I've ever sort of been a part of or have run or whatever always has these ups and downs. And this was probably the first time that I had, traversed the existential moment of failure to get to the other side of something that looks like it could be successful. And this is when we got an office. We started hiring people. That game started doing pretty well. And that's kind of when the company became like a business, And this was this must have been 93.
Right. And you've done 3 years where it's scrimping and saving, it's hard work.
Yeah.
How's your
Completely
relationship?
bootstrapped.
How's your relationship with Jason in that pressurized, environment? Were you getting
I think we were young. We were just really into what we were doing.
Yeah.
We loved the programming. We loved the games. And we loved more than just video games, like D&D and things like that as well. And we were, college age, so we didn't care that much. Though I had gotten out of college, so I sort of had a little bit of pressure.
Okay, so let's jump forward 2 or 3 years. The game's come out that deletes everyone's computer, and it's about to come out.
You're skipping a bunch, but that's cool.
You managed to record it, all the cartridges, all the discs, but it nearly bankrupts you. You've got this new prospect that you've decided to call Halo at the last minute, thankfully. Steve Jobs is into it. But yeah, money again, I guess, is very, very tight. And Microsoft come knocking and want to acquire you. Is that how it happened, or did you approach them?
There was a couple of interesting bits in between. So after Myth 2 came out, like while Myth 2 was being finalized, the Halo team was started, and that's when it was very small, a handful of folks. And we had a team on the West Coast that was making a game called Oni, which was a third-person sort of brawler shooter. So we had three groups going, and we had done a distribution deal, which also included a little bit of investment with a company called Take-Two.
Never heard of them.
Yeah, and this was before Grand Theft Auto 3 had come out, so they were not like the big powerhouse that they are today. They were kind of a distributor, very effective distributor, but still kind of scrappy, had a similar vibe. We really connected with them. We did this deal. It was like a long-term deal, and it funded, our operations through the release of Halo and beyond. And then they actually brought us to the Xbox Roadshow to see Seamus Blackley and Kevin Bacchus and the team with the big. I don't know if you ever saw that prototype. It was like this big silver X, that they would cart around. Watch their little demos of ping pong balls flying around and everything. And we realized it was a PC. This is a PC wearing a console outfit. Mm-hmm. So we called Ed Fries, who was running it, and asked him if we could make our game for the Xbox.
Were you not skeptical that it was not going to be good?
We were skeptical, but we saw that there could be opportunity there. Like we had watched everything that's been happening in the console part of the business, and it seemed so inaccessible to us because either the companies were not. We didn't know anybody there, or the tech was very different, and the style of games were different. And here we thought, oh, this is something that is not that far away. It's very relatable, like what the hardware architecture looked like. It was sort of built on DirectX and a version of rendering tech that we already use. The distance between here and there is not too long. And maybe there's an opportunity here, because this was also right when Microsoft announced they were going to spend something like $500 million marketing this thing. So I don't know, maybe in some ways my entrepreneur ears went, cha-ching, let's call it Microsoft. But that was our introduction to them, was just, hey, could we make this game? And Ed knew about us, and I think he was a fan of Myth.
Right.
And that just started the conversation.
That makes perfect sense, everything you laid out there. But also, you've sort of had the co-signing of Steve Jobs, right? Apple's backing you on the biggest stage they have. So is there a part of you that's thinking?
Yes. We started on the Mac. We had a lot of success on Apple platforms, a lot because we had that market mostly to ourselves. There wasn't a lot of competition. We had a great community of fans. Like with Myth, we ran one of the first sort of online services, BungieNet, which is kind of similar to BattleNet. So we had a lot of interaction with our players. We would go to the trade shows, et cetera, et cetera. So in some ways, this was the height of the Mac and PC wars, you know? So
the adverts, yeah.
When we announced that we were doing this, we got some mail.
Right, yeah. And you said that, the initial conversation with Ed Fries is, is there any chance we could put our new game on your forthcoming console? When does that become, we're going to give you money and acquire your company?
Very quickly, it was an interesting conversation because they were not that far away from launch. They realized that the software portfolio was what was going to make or break. Well, there's a lot of moving parts. The hardware is certainly important, but the software library had to be really good. The games had to be great. And they were trying to build their own team and do partnerships with developers and just try to find the best games they could. So they knew something about our background and Halo. So right off the bat, it was a very interesting conversation. And when it got to... when it sort of escalated once or twice, when it got to the topic of is it feasible to talk about an acquisition, at that point the opportunity changed from can we make this game for your thing to what if we sort of structured the software library around this game? It'd be a launch title. It wasn't necessarily preordained it was going to be the launch title. There were many launch titles, but that was the opportunity that we were excited about, was you don't really get a chance to be the launch title on a new console.
Mm-hmm. And I read that you wanted to get everyone in the company to say that they were okay with that, which is a tricky thing to do if you've got 65 people or however many you said you had. You only need a couple to go, no, I don't think it's the thing we should do. So how did that conversation go?
I guess mixed. Mostly well. I think we were pretty... I don't know, it was a different day. This was, 99 we were having these conversations. We were fairly transparent, we were very, small bootstrap company. We were open about, what we were working on and who we were talking to. I think some folks that were at the company were very much Mac diehards and thought of Microsoft as the evil empire. Mm-hmm. So some of those conversations were tricky. But, at the end of the day, we all agreed that what was best for the game and the team was an outcome that looked like what we thought we should go for.
Okay. How much did Microsoft pay?
I think I got a couple of sandwiches out of it and a case of LaCroix. Yeah.
Okay, the reason I ask is because we know how much later on Activision pays, but for this one it says between 20 and 40 million. So let's help Wikipedia out.
The actual cost was probably somewhere in that range, maybe a little more. It really depends when you factor in all the components of it. But
What components?
it was not like it was definitely less than $1 billion.
Okay.
If that's your question.
Damn it. Okay, all right. Does it change your life personally?
Yeah, in many ways. I mean, I moved across the country. I was no longer the entrepreneur. My role at the company changed a lot. They did pay, so
Sure.
I had some farting around money. I bought a custom Les Paul.
Nice.
Yeah, it's a nice guitar, so we got it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So
It didn't make me any better at playing guitar.
Tell me about the launch day for Halo Combat Evolved. Do you know that it's good?
Yes and no. I mean, we know it's good in the sense that it was good like any other game that we had made. Like, we were playing the game and having fun with it. We had no idea it would have as big an impact as it had. I mean, it just seemed like a pretty good game. Mm-hmm. The moment in time in which it came out, the context in which it shipped, like what other games were around, the fact that we did spend quite a bit of time on the controller interface to make it, you can watch all the YouTube videos about the acceleration, deceleration, and the magnetism and all those systems that went into making a precision, pixel-perfect shooter game work on a relativistic input device like a controller. A significant amount of work went into that. But we had no concept that it would be a actually meaningful game.
Yeah, because the context is for young people in the room that GoldenEye 007 had come out for the N64, and that was the first kind of very decent.
GoldenEye was awesome.
First-person shooter on a console, and previously people had said it couldn't be done. It's like a PC thing, and then Halo comes out. And, not only is it a first-person shooter on a console, it's also coming out for the Xbox, which everyone thinks is a joke. Like, I cannot emphasize enough how much people thought this console was going to fail, right?
Really? Was that the vibe?
Don't land me in it. That's true, right? You knew that.
I guess. I don't know. Everybody likes to root against the big company. Yeah.
Right, and it felt like, okay, we've got Sony. Well, it's a very Japanese-dominated industry, the consoles, right? It's Nintendo, it's Sony, and that's it. We don't need Microsoft with its PC ways coming in. That was the general feeling, right? And then, of course, Halo comes out, proves everyone wrong. It's immensely brilliant and popular, sells millions of copies, and it must have been a good moment. I spoke to Seamus Blackley earlier this year, who was instrumental in the development of the Xbox. He said that Halo is the only reason that Xbox survived. And I think, from your story, there's also a sense that you could say, well, Microsoft saved Bungie as well, because you had this massive knockback and gave you a way forward. So, how do you reflect on that now?
I do think that it was a great combination. I think we would have had a really hard time being as successful as we were without Xbox as a platform and Microsoft as the accelerator. And I think, that Xbox probably would have had a hard time being having as much longevity without a franchise like Halo exclusive to the platform.
Yeah.
Not exclusive anymore. Funny how things change, isn't it?
It is, yeah. The decision that you make to leave, you're, early 30s, still, very young. Was that tough?
Yeah. It was tough, but I was ready to take a little bit of a break. It'd been 10, 11 years of full intensity.
You were burnt out, you think?
I wouldn't say burned out as much as well, maybe, I don't know. I was just ready to not be the guy. Mm-hmm. And my wife got pregnant.
Right.
And she wanted to come back here. And I thought, I think maybe it's time to spend time with Laura. Mm-hmm. And start a family.
Yeah. Did anyone try and stop you?
Oh, no. They helped me pack the boxes and held the door open.
Didn't you have some kind of thing in your contract, though? You got to stay for 5 years or something?
Yes and no. I mean, yes, but not 5 years. So.
Okay.
And I'm not really the best employee either. I've had a few moments in my life where I've seen my future, if I do the next couple of things that are expected of me, this is what my future looks like. And I find that scary. I don't find it comforting. I find it unsettling. I very much want to explore possibilities and for anything to be possible. And that was another aspect of my, I very clearly remember having a conversation with Ed about Ed Fries, who was running Xbox at the time, what the next couple of steps would look like for me at Microsoft. And it would have been fantastic, but I didn't want it, I wanted to go back out into the wild,
Right.
Yeah.
And once again, it's against expectation, right? Which is kind of what drives all your decisions, it sounds like.
Yeah.
Yeah. All right, let's come to your fourth game, Alex. So this is May the 5th, 2009. It came out for PC and Xbox 360. Do you remember the one? PopCap.
Oh, this is Plants vs. Zombies. Perhaps the greatest game ever made.
Tell us about this one.
I was a big fan of PopCap. All of their games, the PVZ, but before it even, Peggle and Zuma and Bejeweled, they all have a soul to them. And this game, even though it's not endless or roguelike, it's got a beginning, middle, and an end, it has the soul in spades, and it's also just an incredibly well-designed system. I got to meet George Fan, who made the game, and I had a conversation with him about how the game was built from a systems perspective, the design, and I had assumed that he modeled things out and simulated and had spreadsheets, and it was all just hand-tuned, which kind of blew me away. And yeah, I fell in love with this game. I really do think it's one of the best games ever made.
So good. Yeah, so good. Yeah, I mean, it's I don't want to be rude, but PopCap are acquired by EA, and it sort of feels like the stuff you're describing there, all of those wonderful, inventive games, sort of falls away a little bit. Is that the risk with acquisitions?
Yeah, EA killed that thing. It's just horrible. No, seriously, and they would say the same thing. They bought just an incredible history and just a culture and a way, and unfortunately weren't able to preserve it and grow it. I was there. I was at EA. I was in a lot of those conversations, and right. I think it's been frustrating for the folks who've worked on these games. I'll tell you, I didn't realize this. I think PopCap was very much, I don't want to talk out of school here, but I think they were very much a stoner culture.
Right.
And in fact, I didn't realize that if you've played Plants vs. Zombies, the character Crazy Dave, he wears a pot on his head. I didn't realize that's because he's a pothead until probably a couple years ago when I asked, somebody told me about it. I told somebody, hey, I'm going to talk to George Fan, and they're like, oh, you should talk to him about the pothead, Dave. He didn't even know that. So it's like somebody put that in the game.
That's great.
From
Turns
Popcat.
out
Yeah.
you've given Wikipedia's editors something after all. That's
I'm not saying that's what makes the game good.
No, I know that, I
Don't
know
do
that.
drugs, kids.
Yeah. Don't worry. There'll
yeah.
be no headlines, I'm sure. Why do you think Bungie survives the acquisition in a way that PopCap doesn't? And the games that come out subsequently still have all of the same character and the, qualities.
I think for the most part, Microsoft decided to leave us alone. There is some precedent there. So Faza Interactive is another Chicago company. That's Jordan Weissman's company, who I mentioned a little while ago, was acquired by Microsoft probably a year before we were. And, Microsoft in decided to integrate them into their games business, fully integrated, so like, okay, you guys got a bunch of artists, they can now report to our art director over here, and blah, 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 blah. And they sort of quickly realized that, hey, if we're buying something, we're probably buying the team because they do something good. Let's not change that, And so I think they swung a little bit to the other end of the spectrum in terms of like, hey, when we came into the company, they were pretty much like, okay, we don't want to mess anything up, so why don't you guys go work over there, and we won't ever come in there. It wasn't exactly that, but like, we built out open space. Nobody at Microsoft worked in open space. Everybody had their own office. That was part of the ethos of the company, but we brought out, opened our own open space. The key card to get into the space had to be a special Microsoft key card. So unless you were in the Bungie business unit, you couldn't actually get into the space, which that seems kind of dumb and gross, but I think it was just part of the idea of let's just try to be an accelerator here and not change too much. And I think that's why it worked.
Mm-hmm. Right. Post Bungie, you sort of move into more leaner, more modular kind of game development with the studios that you're working at. And yet you end up at, as I said in the introduction, at Disney Interactive, working inside a global, entertainment giant. How did you sort of reconcile those two interests for you? You obviously like working small, and now you're head of Disney.
I wasn't head at Disney.
the games bit, you know what I mean.
Disney Interactive. Okay, let's see. I got to Disney by way of my studio, Wide Load Games, which was really started in the early 2000s with the intention of trying to build a sustainable game development model. Mm-hmm. Having been through the Xbox launch, we saw a lot of studios that didn't make it because costs were going up, and the business was getting harder and harder. So Wide Load Games was really set up to try and figure out how to be able to build high production value games without having to fire everybody, when you're done. And we were pretty successful. Ended up working with Disney, and we began to help Disney with other projects that they were doing, and that turned into an opportunity to not just have Disney publish our games, but to acquire the studio with the thought that I could then help run the business, run the creative aspects of Disney's game business. And I don't know, I couldn't say no to that. I mean, like, how awesome! Yeah. And Disney is an amazing company. It's very, very different. Microsoft's also an amazing company. Very, very different though. Microsoft is full of incredibly smart technical engineers. Disney is full of these incredibly talented, creative entertainers, and everywhere you look around, you see best in class. You see Pixar over here. It's like, oh my gosh, they're the best. You see Disneyland over there. It's like, oh my gosh, they're the best. You see ESPN, same thing. You see the guys that do Phineas and Ferb, same thing. You're surrounded by excellence everywhere from a entertainment craft perspective, which at Microsoft, you would look around and go, there's Windows, okay? And there's Excel, right on. But a totally different kind of inspiration, right? So being at Disney with the library, the day I started, I walk into the building, and they're like, "Here's your card key. Welcome. By the way, we just bought Marvel." Like, what? So just an incredible environment in which to be creative.
Right.
Now, that said, games were not their DNA, so there was a lot of challenge and education about how the industry operates, and still lots of opportunity for a company like that to do really interesting, meaningful things in games, but very different experience than being at Microsoft.
Right, yeah. Okay, well, we're going to bring your story right up to date by coming to your fifth and your final game, which is intricately entwined with what you're doing now. So, tell us, this is from 2017, early access?
Yes, game number 5 is Fortnite. It looks like pretty old footage.
Yeah, this is the origin from the original.
Yeah. Okay. Right on. Fortnite is a fascinating game, and many of you, I'm guessing, many of you have played it. Especially, I don't know. My son's in here. I know he played it a lot. I didn't play Fortnite when it first came out. It came out and it kind of blew up. It became this sort of cultural thing. I played it a few times, but I didn't really start playing Fortnite until a few years ago when the creative mode came out. And there's something happening in the game industry now, which I think is I don't know if it's a movement. I think it kind of started with Minecraft, where there's a whole community of not just players, but player creators. You know, the game's being built by the people that are playing it. Right. And that's, Minecraft is a lot about that. Fortnite has become that. Roblox was built specifically for that. But there's this whole generation that's growing up now with the expectation that, hey, my gaming community is built by me, my peers. And I found that really fascinating about Fortnite, and I got really into it. In fact, I started a whole studio to just do that, and that's what I've been doing the last couple of years. I got a game shipping next week that I started just coding myself. Like I haven't been writing code that is commercial and will ship for probably over 10 years, and I've probably written 80% of the code in this game that's coming out.
When you say ship, what do you mean, though? You mean you're releasing a game within the Fortnite framework that people can enter a code to play?
Yes.
Right.
Yeah. And y'all should do that.
How do you tell people that you've done that, though?
I just did.
Oh, this is it. This is the
marketing
drive.
plan right here. Well, the way Fortnite has kind of developed is very inside out, very community driven. So in the 2 years that we've been on this platform, we've shipped probably 30 games, and we've done games with a lot of partners. Like we have a game coming out with Mattel last week. We did. We've done games with Epic and with Twitch and all that. So we find players that come into our community, and then, if they like it, they come to our Discord, and now we've got a lot of players who are in our Discord or hang out with us on our socials, play games with us, and that's how we tell them that we have a new game coming out.
Got it. So the model is you've built this community, they're kind of on Discord, they're in Fortnite, and you go to Mattel and go, if we make a Fortnite-themed minigame for you, we can tell all these people, pay us.
That is definitely part of the model. Yes.
Right, okay.
We also do all of that without having Mattel, who pays us. We just do it ourselves.
How do you earn money from that?
Epic gives us money.
Okay. All right. We could do another 40 minutes on this, but
Yes.
we should probably move on.
Starting December 1st, Fortnite will let us open our own storefront within our own games inside of Fortnite. So you'll be able to spend V-Bucks on special hats that I make for my game.
And the sound effects, I hope.
Oh, yeah, of course. Exclusive soundtrack.
Alex, this has been so good. So let's go through your console. We've got Tetris, Minotaur, The Labyrinths of Crete, Eco, Plants vs. Zombies, and Fortnite. Good console. You into it? All right, Alex, we need a name for your console to market to the world. We know from Halo that you're super bad at names. Well, not Halo, but the ones that came before.
Yes, naming is. I think naming is very important.
Right.
And I think I'll tell you the name and why. We're going to call this the King Daddy box. And we're going to call it that because probably about 10 years ago, I made a bet with my then 8-year-old daughter. I can't even remember what the bet was, but I knew I was right, and she thought I was wrong. And the stakes were that if she was right, I can't even remember what I was going to buy her, but it was something she wanted. But if I was right, she was going to then refer to me as King Daddy from then on in perpetuity. So that has now become my gamer handle, the name of every piece of technology I have, and now the name of my perfect console.
Amazing, the King Daddy box. All right, Alex, I've got 2 minutes. I'm going to ask you one last question. Do you think the next Halo moment is still possible today? So like a game that shifts the culture and the hardware, or have we moved into an era of incrementalism, do you think?
100% yes. I think what you're asking is there's still room for seismic creativity, and 100% yes. I think we're seeing some really interesting things happening with video games. Two things in particular. One is games are really now being built by communities. So if any of you have heard of Grow a Garden or Steal the Brain Rot, maybe? Those are pretty much, I'm not going to say that they're the Mona Lisa, but they have had a seismic impact on games and gaming culture. 41 million concurrent players doesn't lie. Also, what's happening with AI is really fascinating. Everybody's kind of talking about AI. It's probably in a bubble that's going to break, but it is at the very least become an incredible accelerator for ideas. And when ideas get more accessible and more people are able to express their ideas, you really broaden the canvas of what's possible. And I think we're going to start seeing the corners of the room getting explored. The panel at 2 o'clock was amazing because there was some really indie game developers there, and that's where we're going to see the incredible creativity. We're not going to see the seismic shift come out of EA because they have to make the next Battlefield. They got to make the next FC. You know, that's where their investment has to be. But the real exploration of like emotional impact or like some new kind of gameplay or tech that will create a new mechanic in a game, I think will be coming from bottom up because of the combination of that community-led game development and the more accessibility to the tools. It's a combination of things like Fortnite and the AI tools that are here and coming.
Amazing. Alex, thank you so much for sharing with us your perfect console and your story. It's been so good. Let's give it up for Alex, everyone.
Thank you.
And yeah, everyone subscribe to this, please. You can hear yourselves in a few weeks, but Alex also has a podcast. You want to quickly plug that?
Oh, yeah. I have a podcast called The Fourth Curtain where basically I do, me and my co-host Aaron, we do a conversation with a notable game developer or industry folk person. We had Trip Hawkins, the founder of EA, on last week, who's got a really interesting story. So it's been a passion project of mine, available wherever you get your podcasts. Like and subscribe.
Let's hear it again for Simon and Alex.